So we've been making a kind of a seminar. We've been, the times that we've been giving class here for the Sunday Peace, we've been paralleling Srila Prabhupada's activities here in New York. The winter of 1966 through to the spring and now summer of 1965, spring, summer of 1966. So, Srila Prabhupada, when he came to New York, he didn't have any substantial backing. He didn't have really any money at all. He didn't have really any concrete plan of what to do, save and except the instruction of the spiritual master to spread Krishna consciousness in the English-speaking world. He wasn't even personally instructed to come to New York City. That instruction was given to Srila Prabhupada when he was a young man, barely 25, 26 years old. Some nearly 45 years later, at the age of 69, Srila Prabhupada embarked to the United States, to New York City, traveling from Calcutta on a freight boat that took 5 weeks to get to New York City. The route was from Calcutta down to Kanyakumari, Cochin, across the Arabian Sea, into the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, Mediterranean Sea, Straits of Gibraltar, Atlantic crossing in September, which all of us here in New York City know is hurricane season. Miraculously, one of the calmest ocean crossings ever. First having to dock inexplicably in Boston, Massachusetts, and then again another day or two to come to New York City, docking here in Red Hook, Brooklyn at the 17th Street Pier, which now, interestingly or serendipitously enough, is where a Home Depot is located. Back home, back to Godhead Depot. So, Srila Prabhupada had a contact of a non-devotional yogi from India who had made himself kind of well-to-do by presenting impersonalist yoga philosophy. And he had a penthouse apartment on Riverside Drive on West 72nd Street. Initially, Prabhupada stayed with him in that penthouse apartment, and when the conflict between personal and impersonal philosophy, the pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, cannot tolerate impersonal, voidistic, Mayavad philosophy. It's just like if you're in love with someone and someone tries to tell you that the person that you're in love with doesn't exist and is an illusion. You would be pretty upset. So, still maintaining a semblance of etiquette, the impersonalist yogi moved Srila Prabhupada to his windowless Hatha Yoga studio some 4 avenue blocks and 3 regular blocks away, 100 West 72nd Street, 1 block from Central Park. And there Prabhupada lived in that building for 5 months. November, December, January, February, March, till mid-April. And he would have to daily walk that distance back and forth to take a proper bath and to cook a proper meal, because this Hatha Yoga studio only had a little sink and a toilet, no cooking facilities. That winter, November, December, January, February, was one of the coldest and most snow accumulation ever in New York City's recorded history since the late Prabhupada Museum here, you can see from the window, we have gold-plated, the original, very cheap and inexpensive and common at the time, even still now you can get in India, rubber-pointed shoes. And Prabhupada did not get a proper pair of shoes until after that winter. So Prabhupada is walking this distance back and forth, and it was there in the Upper West Side, in this place, 100 West 72nd Street, that Prabhupada completed his Bhagavad Gita as it is, that we all have in our hands today. He was working on the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he made many solitary bhajans that you can listen to. He's chanting, of course, Hare Krishna Maha Mantra in different melodies. He's chanting the prayers of Queen Kunti, the prayers of Shukadeva Goswami for the invocation of Srimad Bhagavatam, and many other things were recorded up there. Also, some of the first young people who invited Srila Prabhupada to come downtown, as we're here now, first to the Bowery, and then later by emergency need and circumstance to the East Village, had seen Srila Prabhupada in the uptown situation. They make like a joke, the young people, about this impersonalist yogi. They called him an uptown Swami, which meant that, you know, he's up there just exploiting the sentiments of the rich people, you know, just giving them some idea that they're cool and they're spiritual, but not really giving them the real thing. And those young people, they invited Srila Prabhupada who should come down to the East Village, and also Greenwich Village nearby, the West Village, because that was a lot more of a happening place than uptown. So one particular young man named Harvey Cohn, he was a resident of 94 Bowery, which we're going to hear about at length. And at that time, that area was known as the Skid Row of New York, termed Bowery Bums. That's where ruined, alcoholic, homeless men were living in very terrible situations. So the real estate there was cheap, like anything. That area of New York, quite different than what it is now, was more or less just kind of like a bombed-out war zone. So they had many nice buildings, pre-war, walk-up, Victorian-style architectural buildings, and nobody wanted to. How could you rent them out? So some of these buildings were used in the Industrial Revolution as kind of like workshops, sweatshops. So entire floors were just like abandoned factories. So there were many at this time artists, musicians, and all kinds of bohemian avant-garde people who needed big space for their studios, for their music sessions, etc., etc. So the real estate people, they created a term called AIR lofts, artist in resident lofts. So this young man named Harvey Cohn had invited Srila Prabhupada to come for free to stay in his loft with another young kind of man that was paying the rent, and he himself was coming to San Francisco in 1966, and later he became one of Prabhupada's first disciples, and he was a painter. And if you go to 26th Avenue, you see a kind of avant-garde painting of the Panchatattva, dancing in Sankirtan, that was executed by this young man. So, Prabhupada's apartment in 100 West 72nd Street was burglarized. His reel-to-reel tape recorder was stolen, his typewriter was stolen, and he was very upset about this, as normally any of us would be if you're burglarized. And he had been given this offer by the young man to come down for free and stay in his apartment. And stay in his big artist-in-resident loft, and he could have gatherings there. There was an article written in June, this month, in 1966, all about Srila Prabhupada's activities. The Village Voice, even still to this day, is a very respected newspaper of the East Village. So this write-up brought Prabhupada a lot of notoriety. Many musicians and many people in the area were coming by. It was a very, very good situation. So Prabhupada had lost his spirit for living in the room in 100 West 72nd Street. What would prevent the janitor, we suspected, from doing it again? Harvey Cohen and his friend Bill Epstein had advised him to relocate downtown and assured him of a more interesting following among the young people here. They bid and tracked the proposal and he began to reconsider it. Then Harvey offered Prabhupada his studio on the Bowery. As Prabhupada was preparing to leave his 72nd Street address, an acquaintance, an electrician who worked in the building, came to warn him the Bowery was no place for a gentleman. He protested. It was the most corrupt place in the world at the time. Prabhupada's things had been stolen from room 307 uptown, but moving to the Bowery was not the answer. Prabhupada's new home, the Bowery, has a long history. In the early 1600s, when Manhattan was known as New Amsterdam and was controlled by the Dutch West India Company, Peter Minuet, the governor of New Netherlands, stalked out a north-south road that was called the Bowery, because a number of boweries or farms lay on either side. It was a dusty country road lined with quaint Dutch cottages and bordered by peach orchards growing in the estate of Peter Stuyvesant. Who here has ever been in the Delancey Street, Essex Street subway station and taken an F train on the northbound side? So the beautiful mosaic on the wall there, which is very nice, it's one of the most attractive mosaics, is Peter Stuyvesant's peach orchards in the 1600s. For your information. It became part of the high road to Boston, and it was of strategic importance during the American Revolution as the only land entrance to New York City. In the early 1800s, the Bowery was predominated by German immigrants. Later in the century, it became predominantly Jewish, and gradually it became the city center of theatrical life. However, as the history of Lower Manhattan describes, after 1870 came the period of the Bowery's celebrated degeneration. Fake auction rooms, saloons specializing in 5-cent whiskey and knockout drops, sensational dime museums, filthy and rat-ridden stale beer dives, together with Charles M. Boyd's song, the Bowery, I'll never go there anymore, fixed it forever in the nation's consciousness as a place of unspeakable corruption. The reaction of Prabhupada's electrician friend was not unusual. The Bowery is still known all over the world as Skid Row, a place of ruined and homeless alcoholics. Perhaps the uptown electrician had done business in the Bowery and had seen the derelict sitting around passing a bottle or lying unconscious in the gutter, or staggering up to passerby and drunkenly bumping into them to ask for money. There's quite a vivid description here. Thefts are commonplace. Man's pockets might be searched 10 or 20 times while he slept in just one night. The rates of hospitalization and death in the Bowery were 5 times higher than the national average. And many of the homeless men bore marks of recent injuries or violence. Prabhupada's loft, the 94 Bowery, was 6 blocks south of Houston Street. When Prabhupada finally moved to 26 Second Avenue, Houston Street, one block further, Prabhupada and a few of his young friends physically carried all of his belongings. He bought a new real day corner. Those things were heavy back then. Suitcase, books. And at this time of year, the end of June, try doing that walk this time of year. 94 Bower, that's between just north of Hester Street, walk all the way up to Houston, walk another block east to 2nd Avenue, and then another block and a half to 26 2nd Avenue in this type of weather. The block that Prabhupada lived on consisted of 2 bars, a flop house, and 2 buildings with lofts. In the 1960s, loft living was just beginning in that area of New York. The city had given permission for painters, musicians, sculptors, and other artists who required more space than available, and then also parlayed into musicians. To live in buildings that had been constructed as factories in the 19th century. After these abandoned factories had been fitted with fireproof doors, bathtubs, shower stalls, and heating, an artist could inexpensively use a large space. These were the AIR lofts. Harvey Cohn's loft on the top floor of 94 Bowery was an open space almost 100 feet long from east to west and 25 feet wide. It received a good amount of sunlight on the east, the Bowery side, and also had windows on the west end as well as a skylight. The exposed rafters and ceiling were 12 feet high above the floor. So Prabhupada set up a lectern with a dais, and there many people would come, mainly for kirtan, and Prabhupada was also giving Bhagavad Gita classes. Silence our cell phones, please.
Something is there?
Prabhupada lived on the Bowery, sitting under a small light, while hundreds of derelicts also sat under hundreds of naked lights on the same city block. He had no more fixed income than the derelicts, nor any greater security of a fixed residence, yet his consciousness was different. He was translating Srimad Bhagavatam into English, speaking to the world through his Bhaktivedanta purports. His duty, whether on the 14th floor of a Riverside Drive apartment or in the corner of a Bowery loft, was to establish Krishna consciousness as the prime necessity for all humanity. He went on with his translating and with his constant vision of a Krishna temple in New York City. Because his consciousness was absorbed in Krishna's universal mission, he did not depend on his surroundings for shelter. Home for him was not a matter of bricks and wood, but of taking shelter of Krishna in every circumstance. As Prabhupada had said to his friends uptown, would warn him about going to the Bowery, everywhere is my home. Whereas without Krishna's shelter, the whole world would be a desolate place. Even you're the richest man in the world and own vast, opulent properties in dozens and dozens of high real estate places. Without Krishna, you're living in a lonely desert. Often we would refer to a scriptural statement that people live in 3 different modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. Life in the forest is in the mode of goodness, life in the city in passion, and life in a degraded place like a liquor shop, a brothel, or the Bowery is in the mode of ignorance. But to live in a temple of Vishnu is to live in the spiritual world, Vaikuntha, which is transcendental to all 3 material modes. So, Srila Prabhupada, his mission was to deliver the spiritual world, the facility of pure consciousness, to the entire universe. So this material world is known as Dorgadevi. Durga means fort, like a maximum security prison. You cannot go out, and also you cannot come in. There's only two ways that you come into the prison: as a prisoner, or as someone who is ultimately engaged to help the prisoners get out by legal and proper means. In other words, to be corrected and rectified. So that is the pure devotee. They don't come to this world like those who are forced by their material desires or by the reactions of their bad karma to stay here. So that's in general, but in specific, the pure devotee, he's not living on the Bowery. He's not living, you can't say any address. He is completely otherworldly in the ultimate good sense of the term, because he's always with Krishna. And he creates the realm, the atmosphere of Krishna's original abode, Loka Vrindavan, wherever he is. So in a sense, to be in a place like the Bowery in the mid-1960s, it shows such an incredible, striking contrast. Just like a reviewing of the Hope Diamond or some very fancy, very rich jewel. It's not done in bright sunshine, it's done on a dark background, plush, black, or purple velvet with one spotlight on it, so you can really see its true beauty. So Prabhupada's activities here, in coming to New York City, struggling, having so many obstacles seemingly to overcome, it actually adds to the glory and amazement of his divine grace and ultimately of Krishna himself, and in their transcendental loving relationship between Krishna and his pure devotee. Srila Prabhupada one time revealed that Krishna asked him to leave the spiritual world and come down to this planet, and he only gave him one instruction. Simply write your books, and I will do everything else. So Srila Prabhupada had that faith, and ultimately, he understood that Krishna would do everything else. Not that he just sat back passively and did nothing. He endeavored with all his might and used his intelligence most ingeniously. But his faith in Krishna and his desire to please Krishna, which, when the pure devotee comes to this material world, pleasing Krishna is not a private affair. It is meaning to expand the compassion of Krishna for every single living entity in this material tabernacle, to liberate them from the prison, from Durgadevi, and bring them home back to Godhead. And this Bowery loft, where Prabhupada was holding his meetings and performing kirtan, was also transcendental. When he was behind the partition, working in this corner, before the open pages of Srimad Bhagavatam, that room was as good as his room back at the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan. So those of us who live in New York City, if we have opportunity to go to Vrindavan, round trip ticket, JFK, New Delhi, it's a very nice meditation that just before, okay, vice versa, you are leaving, okay, let's do it this way. You are in Vrindavan and you are about to come back to New York City. You should go to Prabhupada's rooms at the Radha Damodar Temple in Sevakunj, one of the most sacred places in Vrindavan, where Srila Prabhupada had his personal quarters, and still to this day they're being maintained. At the place where Srila Rupa Goswami lies in sacred samadhi, and the Radha Damodar Temple courtyard was the place where all of the Goswamis would come together and discuss Krishna consciousness and make plans for spreading Krishna consciousness all over the universe, and where they exchanged ideas. They were all engaged in writing the holy scriptures, the holy books, meant to expand Lord Chaitanya's movement. Most sacred place. And this is where Prabhupada was begging for the mercy of the predecessor acharyas, the six Goswamis, and Lord Krishna himself and his associates, to be able to fulfill the instruction of his spiritual master to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world, beginning with the English-speaking world. Prabhupada, the entire world, the entire universe also includes Bhartabhumi, India, the place where Krishna descends, Krishna's chosen country. Prabhupada was not able to do it there for so many decades. But after a brief 4-year period in 1970, Srila Prabhupada was already amazingly successful. By that time he had half of the temples that he was predicted at birth to open. His horoscope, on the day that he was born, at the age of 70, this child will cross the ocean, become a great exponent of religion, and open 108 temples. So as early as 1970, he had 45 to 50 temples, and he came back with converted American and European disciples, young men and women in the prime of their youth. This astounded the people of India, who by then were only 23 years fresh from one of the most oppressive colonial rules of the British Empire, subjugating the people of the subcontinent of India in unspeakable injustice. And here, the beautiful young people, the descendants of their persecutors, completely giving up the so-called Western way of life and taking with enthusiasm to the culture of bhakti that their forefathers had led a very serious multi-generational attack to make the people of India question their own Vedic heritage. So the elders of the time would live through this, the atrocities of the British, especially for the last few decades prior to complete independence in 1947. The British really stepped up their campaign. They were just so astounded what Srila Prabhupada had done. They were moved to tears. They said that what Swami Bhaktivedanta has done, he has gotten, let's say, revenge, or he had made right all the wrong that we had been subjected to by converting the foreigners to our religion. It made them rethink their own religion, which is the eternal Sanatana Dharma, the true religion of everyone, in all times, in all places, and in all circumstances. That room was as good as his room back at the Radha Damodar Temple in Vrindavan. News of the Swami's move to the Bowery Walk spread, mostly by word of mouth, at the Paradox. The Paradox was located at 64 East 7th Street, which is between 1st and 2nd Avenue. The block just south of St. Mark's Place, which runs all the way from Tompkins Square Park at Avenue A, all the way to the West Village. Still to this day, it's a very important street for the young people. So, Harvey Cohn and Bill Epstein would see Prabhupada. They made it their business to be like the town criers down here and spread the news of Srila Prabhupada amongst all the beatniks, bohemians, and free thinkers. And they started coming to this Bowery Walk. The musical kirtans were especially popular on the Bowery, since the Swami's new congregation consisted mostly of local musicians and artists, not the fuss-budgety older people uptown. Who responded more to the transcendental music than to the philosophy. So the roommate, this David Allen, who Harvey Conan posted there, he seemed very, very promising. He was from the Midwest, was a handsome young man, he was only in his early 20s, and Prabhupada even thought that he could be trained up to become an initiated Brahmana at one point. This is a very nice section of Srimad Bhagavatam, this chapter, of Prabhupada Leela reads Prabhupada's biography on the Bowery. There's many nice little personal vignettes of some of the first people who came and were impressed by Srila Prabhupada. He held his evening meetings on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, just as he had uptown. The loft was out of the way for most of his acquaintance, and it was on the Bowery. So you're in the East Village and you have to come down to the Bowery, which at that time was such a crime-ridden and dangerous and unpleasant area. The only thing that had young people here were the artists and musicians who had the cheap real estate and had these huge apartments and lofts to do their own thing. But it took quite a brave and adventurous person to venture down there. So, ultimately, this young man who was Prabhupada's roommate, he became a drug addict, and it was an incident where he nearly attacked Prabhupada physically and threatened him with violence. So Prabhupada's ability to stay in his Bowery loft came to an abrupt end. At first, David and the Swami lived together peacefully. In the large hall, the Swami worked conservatively on his side of the partition, meaning like a curtain partition in his big, giant space. However, David started taking marijuana, LSD, and amphetamines, and Prabhupada had no choice but to tolerate it. Several times he told David that drugs and hallucinogenics would not help him in his spiritual life, but David would look distracted. He was even becoming estranged from the Swami. But Prabhupada had a plan to use the loft as a temple, to transform it into New York's first temple of Radha and Krishna. And he wanted David's cooperation. Although the neighborhood was one of the most miserable places in the entire world, Prabhupada talked of bringing deities from Jaipur. That was blessed by Krishna 6 years later in 1972, when the very renowned and very high-class queen of Jaipur, Gayatri Devi, she was even recognized in the West for her elegant stature at the time. She arranged these deities of Shri Shri Radha Govinda to be given to Srila Prabhupada to come to New York City. He wanted to start temple worship, even on the Bowery. He thought David might help. After all, they were roommates, so there could be no question of David's not cooperating, but he had to give up his bad habits. Prabhupada was trying to help him, but David was too disturbed. He was headed for disaster. And so were Prabhupada's plans for the law. Sometimes, even under the influence of a drug, he would pace around the loft, even not under the influence of a drug. Other times he appeared deep in thought. One day, on a dose of LSD, he went completely crazy. As Carl Jurgens, one of Prabhupada's supporters, put it, he just flipped out, and the Swami had to deal with a crazy man. Things had been leading to this. He was a crazy kid who always took too much, but the real madness happened suddenly. Swamiji was working peacefully at his typewriter when David freaked out. David started moaning and pacing around the large open area of the loft. Then he began yelling and howling and running all around. He went back to where the Swami was. Suddenly, Prabhupada found himself face to face not with David, nice David, whom he was going to take to India to show the Brahmanas in Vrindavan, but a drugged, wild-eyed stranger, a madman. Prabhupada tried to speak to him. What is the matter? But David had nothing to say. There was no particular disagreement, just madness. Prabhupada moved quickly down 4 flights of stairs. This was a walk-up building with no elevator. Up and down 4 flights of stairs for everything. He had not stopped to gather up any of his belongings. Imagine having to flee your residence so quickly you can't even grab your belongings. It's so dangerous, you have to leave that fast. He didn't even have time to decide where he would go or whether he could return. There had been no time to consider anything. He had taken quite a shock, and now he was leaving the arena of David's madness. The usual group of bums were sitting in the doorway, and with their customary flourish of courtesy, they allowed him to pass. They were used to the elderly swamis coming in and out, going shopping and returning, and they didn't bother him. But he was not going shopping today. Where was he going? He didn't know. He had come onto the street without knowing where he would go. He wasn't going back to the loft, that was for sure. But where could he go? The pigeons flew from roof to roof, traffic rumbled by, and the ever-present bums loitered about, getting drunker on cheap, poisonous alcohol. Although Prabhupada's home had suddenly become an insane terror, the street at its door was also a hellish, dangerous place. He was shaken. He could call Dr. Mishra, the Mayavadi impersonalist of town. They might take him back in, but that chapter of his life was over. He had gone on to something better. He had his own classes, young people chanting and hearing. Was it all over now? After 9 months in America, he had finally gotten a good response to his preaching and kirtan. He couldn't quit just now. A.C. Bhaktivinoda Swami Maharaj, whom everyone knew and respected in Vrindavan as a distinguished scholar and a devotee, who had an open invitation to see the Vice President of India and many other notables, now had to face starkly that he had not one friend of stature in the United States. Suddenly, he was as homeless as any derelict on the street. In fact, many of them, with their long-term berths and flop houses, were more secure than he. They were ruined, but settled. The Bowery could be a chaotic hell if they weren't on a very purposeful errand, going directly to the store or back to your place. There was no place to stand, wondering where you will live, or is there a friend who you can turn to. He wasn't on his way to Chinatown to shop, nor was he taking a little stroll, soon to return to the shelter of the loft. If he couldn't go to the loft, he had no place. How difficult it was to come to preach in America with these crazy people. He had written prophetically in his poem one day when he had arrived in Boston Harbor. My dear Lord, I do not know why you have brought me here. Now you can do with me whatever you like. I guess you have some business here. Otherwise, why would you bring me to this terrible place? What about his scheduled classes? What about David? Should he go back and try to talk with him? This is David's first bit of violence, and there had been other tense moments. David had a habit of leaving soap on the floor in the shower stall that Prabhupada had asked him not to because it was a hazard. But David wouldn't listen. Prabhupada had to remind him, and one day Prabhupada got him angry and shouted at him. But there was no real enemy. Even today's incident had not been a matter of personal difference. The boy was a victim. Prabhupada walked quickly. He had free passage on the speedboat line. He could go back to Vrindavan. But his spiritual master had ordered him to come here. By the strong desire of Sri Sriman Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he had written while crossing the Atlantic, the holy name of Lord Rama will spread throughout all the countries of the Western world. Before nightfall, he would have to find some place to stay, a way to keep up the momentum of his preaching. This is what it meant to be working without government sponsorship, without the support of any religious organization, without a patron. It It meant being vulnerable and insecure. Just see what Srila Prabhupada undertook for our benefit. And so this is a paramount bar that we should all aspire to. How much risk, how much inconvenience, how much are we willing to put ourselves out for the beloved and the Supreme Personality of Godhead? And the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not an ordinary beloved. He's God. And as we see, Prabhupada triumphed. And keep in mind, we just celebrated the anniversary of Srila Prabhupada's 1976 triumph, having a skyscraper building in Midtown Manhattan, tens of thousands of disciples, and a parade on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and a festival in Washington Square Park, which to this day is respected by the authorities of this city. There's no new parades allowed on Fifth Avenue, no such festival allowed in Washington Square Park of that stature. He took over the entire park. This is Krishna reciprocation with his pure devotee. So, the materialistic saying, no pain, no gain, but in the material work, but in spiritual life, in this material world, there has to be struggle. You can struggle for material ends, which ultimately, when you're successful, are all finished at the time of death, or you struggle for the mission of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That activity, whatever you do, even seemingly not perceivable successful by others, in the eyes of Krishna, you are triumphant. And it guarantees you the right to go back home, back to God. It meant being vulnerable and insecure. Vulnerable, dependent on Krishna. There's no other, I have no one else to depend on, no one else to rely on, no one else competent to help me. Krishna likes when we're in that position. Prabhupada faced the crisis as a test from Krishna. Test and also magnifying the glory of his devotee to show his greatness. Just like a father or a mother, they want to see their son or daughter more famous, more glorious than themselves. They will sacrifice everything that their son or daughter will have a better shot than they did. Isn't it? The instruction of Bhagavad Gita was to depend on Krishna for protection. In all activities, just depend upon me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. You will pass over all the obstacles of conditional life by my grace. He phoned Carl Jurgens, who was an elder, a little bit older, in his mid-30s. And he had an apartment, a similar artist in resident loft, on Center Street, 5 blocks west of Bowery. He came right over, and he allowed Prabhupada to move into his apartment, his artist in resident loft. And he was an African-American gentleman, and he was married, well, a common law wife, with a white feminist Jewish woman, who immediately did not like that a Swami was going to move into their apartment, and with his habits against their habits. Anyway, the whole thing is described in detail, but basically speaking, it was a terrible situation. And within 1 week's time, everyone started looking for a new place for Srila Prabhupada. And that's when the 26 Second Avenue apartment and storefront was found. So, one of the young people helping and attracted to Srila Prabhupada at that time has now become His Holiness Mukunda Maharaj. At that time he was known as Michael Grant. He was a musician. He was very impressed by Srila Prabhupada, and he was the kind of person who knew how to get things done. He wasn't just an aimless hippie. He was a very practical person. So he found and arranged a meeting with the landlord for 26 Second Avenue. And between him, Paul Jurgens, and a few others, they pitched in the first month's rent, $125 for the storefront, plus another $70 for the apartment, $195. So there wasn't, what do you call that, where you have to put so many months down, security deposit or something. So the landlord just, okay, it's first month's rent. They signed a contract. No idea where the next month's rent was coming from. Now it was time to move the Swami into his new place. A few friends who were on hand accompanied the Swami over to the Bowery loft. Maybe they were prepared to become his surrendered disciples, but contributing toward the first month's rent and volunteering a few hours of work to help set up his place was exactly the kind of things they could do very willingly. Pitching a few bucks, help carry a few things. At the loft, they all gathered up portions of the Swami's belongings, and then they started out on foot from the Bowery. So carrying everything down 4 flights of stairs, 94 Bowery, hot summer day like this, and walking 6 blocks north to Houston Street, and another avenue block over east to Second Avenue. Try it sometime. See what it feels like. Carry like a 20 or 30 pound, package with you too. It was a safari, a caravan of half a dozen men loaded with Prabhupada's things. Michael carried the heavy Roberts reel-to-reel tape recorder, and even Swami carried 2 suitcases. 2 suitcases. They did everything so quickly that it wasn't until they were well on their way and Mike's arms began to ache and he realized, why didn't we bring a car? It was the end of June and the hazy summer sun poured its heat down into the Bowery jungle. Concrete jungle. Starting and stopping, the strange safari stretched for over a block, slowly trekking along. Prabhupada struggled with his suitcases past a seemingly unending row of restaurant supply shops, lamp stores between Grand, Broome, and Spring Streets. Sometimes he paused and rested, setting his suitcases down. He was finally moving for the Bowery. His electrician friend on 72nd Street would have been relieved, although perhaps he would have disapproved of his Second Avenue address also. At least he was finished residing on Skid Row. He walked on, past the homeless men outside the Salvation Army shelter, past the open-door taverns, stopping at streetlights, standing alongside total strangers, keeping an eye on the progress of his procession of friends who struggled along behind him. The Bowery artists and musicians saw him as, quote, highly evolved, unquote. They felt that the Spirit was moving him and were eager to help him set up his own place so that he could do his valuable spiritual thing and spread it to others. He was depending on them for help, yet they knew he was on a higher level. He was his own protector, or as he said, God protected him. The Swami and his young friends reached the corner of Bowery and Houston, turned right and proceeded east. Gazing steadily ahead, he walked, probably to the southern end of 2nd Avenue, 1 block away. At 2nd Avenue, he would turn left, just 1 block north, across 1st Street and arrive at his new home. As he passed the F-train subway entrance, the storefront came into view, matchless drinks. He gripped his suitcases and moved ahead. At 2nd Avenue in Houston, he hurried through a break in rapid traffic. You would see green trees holding their heads above the high courtyard wall, reaching up like overgrown weeds in the space between the front and rear buildings of his new address. There was no certainty of what awaited him here, but already there had been good signs that these American young people, mad though they were, could actually take part in Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, perhaps his new address would be the place where you can actually get a footing for his International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So, that will conclude our presentation today. We can give us some idea of the journey, the odyssey that Srila Prabhupada undertook to ultimately establish the Krishna Consciousness movement. And perhaps next time we speak, we'll be planning for the incorporation anniversary of ISKCON in July of 1966 to describe the beginnings of Srila Prabhupada's movement legally and practically here from 22nd Avenue. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and his monumental achievement in service to the spiritual master. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
That's your one? That's yours? No.